Welcome to the Beacon Way podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Wilkerson, CEO and co-founder of Beacon Media and Marketing. And here's what I know. The best business lessons don't come from textbooks. They come from the people who've actually been in it. Every episode, I get to sit down with entrepreneurs, business leaders, and the professionals who support them. The attorneys, the CPAs, the coaches, and consultants who've navigated the waters themselves and now help founders and business owners find their own way. Real stories, honest conversation, and the kind of hard-won insight that you can actually use. So I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Beacon Way podcast. And I'm really excited today to be joined by Roger Nairn. Did I say that right?
Nairn. It's very nasally.
Nairn. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah. Don't worry, you're, everyone does it.
Everyone does it. Yes. With me, it's usually the Adrienne part. And for certain generations, I can tell them the whole Rocky analogy. And others look at me like,
I'm in that generation.
You're in that generation. I knew you would know. Yeah. And other people are like, why are you saying your name so weird? You sound like you have a speech impediment. So yes, it's pretty fun. Well, thank you so much, Roger, for joining us today.
Thank you, really Adrienne. Sorry.
Yes, there you go. You had to do it. I love it. I'm excited to dig into podcasting today and remote working. And so tell us a little bit about your company and how you got into this, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so my name is Roger Nairn. I'm the co-founder and CEO of JAR Podcast Solutions. We started out as JAR Audio because at the time when we started the company almost 10 years ago, podcast was only really an audio thing. And I came from the advertising world. I was in marketing advertising for 24 years. And my business partner, Jen, was in media, journalism, writing. And one day we got together over a couple beers and really sort of had a conversation about what brands are doing these days with podcasts. And at the time, brands were making their own shows, doing that thing. However, they weren't really doing a good job of it. And I also knew through some of the brands that I knew that they weren't really happy with the way that the show was performing. It was sort of like back in the social media days where it was like, we got a Twitter account for the sake of having a Twitter account. It was the same. We have a podcast for the sake of everyone else has a podcast. We might as well. So quit my job, started a company. At the time, we were called JAR Audio, and fast forward to now, we're almost 10 years old, and JAR is a podcast production agency that makes, markets, and measures podcasts with brands. We're mostly working with bigger brands, but we do work with some midsize and nonprofits. But our job is to have them take full advantage of what's possible from a business perspective with podcasts.
Awesome, fantastic. Now, you were saying, and when we were connecting before this, we were talking just about how challenging podcasting can be to get over that initial hump necessarily, but that specifically a lot of branded podcasts fail. And your claim was, exactly why, which totally. I loved. And so what are some of the mistakes that you see companies make consistently that lead to even branded podcasts failing? Because I feel like a lot of people don't even brand them necessarily. It's just like you said, for the sake of having one. Yeah. But what are you seeing and how do you address that?
Well, let's start off with some terminology. So when we say a branded podcast, what we mean is it's not a sponsored podcast per se. It's actually the show is created by the brand and brought to you by the brand. So we're really talking about content marketing. And so what we see when it comes to failure is that most podcasts are being created by brands like their marketing assets, when really they should be thought of as audience products. The first mistake that I think of is that a lot of times brands throw in their messaging all throughout and they don't really give the audience a reason to care. So the company, when they are crafting the podcast, thinks to themselves, what do we want to say? What's our messaging going to be? But the better question should actually be on the audience side, thinking, what would our audience want to choose? What would our audience want to spend 30 minutes of their time with? Because this is really what you're competing against right now is your podcast is competing against other podcasts, plus Netflix, plus video games, plus reading a book, plus, all the other forms of entertainment these days. The second mistake that I see a lot is that podcasts are treated like a campaign. Now, podcast can be a campaign. However, campaigns usually have a start and an end date. And with a podcast that is a good podcast, you really want to think about repeat attention over time, building that relationship with the audience. And so that means really thinking about what the format of the show is going to be, who the host is, what's the editorial point of view, how are you going to distribute it, how are you going to create that sort of runway for future episodes, and then how do you measure it and continue to sort of iterate as you go. And then the third thing, speaking of measurements, is are you measuring the wrong thing? So yes, of course, downloads matter, but really when it comes to podcasts, the whole story isn't downloads, it's actually engagement. It's the amount of time people are spending with the show. At the end of the day, podcasts are very much an engagement tool. So repeat listening, what sort of quality feedback are you getting? What's the value you're delivering to the audience? Are you thinking about it for sales and enablement? Are you thinking about it for repeat listening or watching? Those are the things that are going to give you the best ROI if you decide to produce your own show.
Fantastic. And what do you recommend for the analytics part? I mean, it's podcasting is interesting because it's spread out, right? You've got Spotify, you've got Apple, and that's just the audio version. And now podcasts have really become much more of a video based medium than they used to be. So now you got YouTube and you've got all these different things. So how do you guys recommend people track and analyze if they are trying to look for the right things?
Yeah, again, it depends on what your show is meant to do. And we can talk about that in a little bit, but depending on what it's needing to do, you're going to want to host it on the right server. So podcast files or the MP3 is actually hosted on a podcast server. There's lots of different ones out there, and they're all kind of custom depending on what it is that you're looking to do. But really, that's what connects your podcast to all the major podcast players and directories. So you create an RSS feed, which stands for Real Simple Syndication. And once that RSS feed is connected to Apple and Spotify and YouTube and all the different platforms you want your podcast to land on, now you've got that connection, and now the show goes out to whoever's subscribed to it. But then also the data comes back. And so each platform is going to have different measurement tools. There's going to be the basics with all of them, like downloads and listen length. But then some of them are going to have more, demographic information, age, sex, and location of your listeners, usually down to like the city level. Some are going to be more B2B focused. So you're going to be able to see what brands are listening to your podcast, because the IP address will tell you that. You're able to see also, in some cases, a bit more of a persona of what does the listener look like. So I encourage you to really look around at the different features of all the different platforms to determine what's going to make the most sense for you. But I will say that though, that Apple has its own measurements and Spotify has its own measurements and YouTube has its own measurements. And unfortunately, sometimes you need to kind of go into each one and do a little bit of math yourself, but really good platforms will sort of aggregate that for you so that you can, at best, see it all on one dashboard.
Nice. Okay. Very cool. So you talk a lot about the podcast needs a job. Is that kind of what you were just referring to earlier? So tell me more about that and your philosophy, because I'm intrigued. I mean, I agree 100%, but I'm really curious how you help people figure out what the job of their podcast needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, just saying we want a podcast is not a strategy, much like we want to be on, Instagram is not a strategy. So before you hit record, you really want to think about what the podcast is supposed to do for the business. So, do you want to be building trust with a specific niche buyer audience? Do you want to open doors with strategic guests? Do you want to support sales conversations? Do you want to create, pillar content that can be used on other channels? Are you looking to shift perception of the brand? Are you looking to build internal culture? Because podcasts can be great for large organizations that have staff, especially with everyone working remote, sort of spread globally. Right. It's a great way to, get information out there in a easily digestible manner. Or maybe you need to educate a market before you start to sell to them. Each of those jobs creates a different type of show. So you can imagine that not all shows are created equal when it comes to a branded show. So it's really important to be uber clear on exactly what the show is meant to do. And then all your other decisions, like, who's the host going to be? What's the format going to be? What's the, what are the episode subject matters, and guests going to be? All ladders back to that job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense for sure. So what are the different styles then that a podcast needs to do depending on its job? So let's say if a company really wants to use it as a lead gen tool to support their sales team, what would that look like versus an education focus? Like you said, where we're educating a new market. Those seem to be kind of two extremes in my mind. So how
That's a
would
great
those
question.
two look different for you?
Yeah, I mean, with a lead gen podcast, for example, you would want to first, of course, understand from your sales team what are some of the challenges that your audience has, what are some of the questions that they have, what are some of the things that need to be, answered, and then craft the format out of that. Now, it could be a talking head style show where there's, one person who's, talking about a specific subject matter. It could be an interview style where you're bringing on some of your existing clients and maybe treating each episode like a little bit of a case study, and then chopping that up for sales purposes. And then, obviously sales can also needs to involve education. So it could be about a bit more of I think one of the things podcasts are fantastic for is being able to take very sort of sticky, challenging topics, let's say something science related or something in the oil and gas industry, which is going to take a little bit more of a nuanced conversation. And it just allows you to stretch that out into something a little bit more lengthy and story-based. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually tell sort of real life scenario situations and stories that help illuminate the topic and help make it more palatable and accessible by a sort of general audience. So it's actually less about the format than it is about the end sort of goal of what do you want this to accomplish. But you're right, there are certain formats that lend themselves better than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what, in your opinion, is an ideal length for a podcast, if there is one? I mean, you've got Joe Rogan's infamous for his 2, 3, 4-hour marathon podcasts, which I have to say I thoroughly enjoy the clips from his 3 to 4-hour podcasts. And then you've got the really short ones that are, I've been on some that are 10 minutes. It's in, you answer one question, you're out the door. Is it really dependent on what job the podcast has that would determine the length?
Yeah, it is. It is. However, there's also the audience. So you need to actually, turn that question, outwardly to your audience and ask them. So if you have a close relationship with your audience, I think a great question to ask them is, hey, we're thinking about making a podcast. What would you like us to talk about, or what would you like to learn, or what would you like to have an inside view on? And then another question is, how long do you got? And how long do you want a show to be? Now, all that being so, we've seen episodes that are 10, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, upwards to an hour. The sort of Joe Rogan style obviously has a use. I mean, you can't deny his numbers. It's a bit more of a rambly show in the sense that there is no real job other than to have a conversation with that specific guest. So it works for them. And I would also, though, say that yes, he clips that show and cuts it all down and creates those clips. Some people think that his podcast is just those clips. So
you're right.
And I think that goes to the whole concept, the whole question around what is a podcast now? And I think podcasts is very much a movable term. And it's something that we're dealing with, but actually we're actually not really worrying about, in the sense that it's whatever the audience wants it to be.
Yeah.
Our job is to just make it as, as engaging and repeatable and interesting and, returnable as possible. So the answer to it is really, what does your audience want and expect? I mean, if your audience only has, 30 minutes commute time and they typically take the bus, then that's a good answer, and that can give you a bit of a good understanding. All this to be said, though, there are no rules, and you can change your mind as you go, because this isn't live radio, this isn't live TV, this isn't even broadcast TV, in the sense that once you have it out there, you can be altering future episodes based on what the data is showing you, quite simply.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder if at some point we're going to start calling them video casts instead of podcasts.
Video podcasts, video casts. Even just show. We just call them shows now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
But I think that the podcast has a real sort of vibe to it, first of all, but also it is traditionally distributed via the RSS feed. That is one thing that unequivocally makes it a podcast. It's subscribable and available on the listener's time, versus you need to be at this place at this time to watch this show. Now streaming obviously has that as well, but in this case it's actually a lot more niche focused, and the relationship that the audience has with the host is a lot more deep and intimate. And then there's a whole bunch of other sort of characteristics that go into it as well. It's usually typically a little bit more craft, homemade, let's call it. It's a lot more approachable than, film and TV.
Yes. No, I appreciate that very much. I know you and I were laughing a little bit about some of the stories we've had. I've had some crazy things happen on different podcasts. I had one gentleman, I don't know what was going on in his neighborhood, but I felt so bad. The amount of emergency vehicles that were going, sirens. I mean, it was ambulance, police. I mean, and it was just like, and it didn't take over the podcast, but it was definitely going on in the background. And I remember going, he wasn't reacting. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to react. We're just going to go on with the show here. And I'm thinking, I hope my team.
My wife just walked around in the background. We just kept going.
And I think that is one of the beautiful, very humane, but I mean that by like the very human elements of podcasts. And I love the point that you made. This is not an overproduced, sort of thing. There's no makeup guy off to the side over here who's going to make me look better on Riverside. It's a little more raw and it's a little more real. And I wonder if we're going to continue to see an increase of podcasts in our AI world as AI starts to create so much stuff that is mimicking the human conversation, the human presentation. Are we going to start seeing kind of more of an evolution over to podcasts because it has retained that human element?
It has to. I would say I would say that it isn't all retaining its human element, because I think AI is playing a bigger role in the production side. So unfortunately, we are seeing a lot of podcast production and a lot of the creative decisions being made by AI. What I will say though is that at the end of the day, we only each have 24 hours in the day, and X amount of time has been allotted to entertainment and time on our own and educating ourselves. And so we have more choices than ever, but still the same amount of time. And so, yes, AI will make things easier. I mean, we use it as a production company. We use it to make our productions easier. We don't use it to make creative decisions. We do use it for some research and things like that. Mm-hmm. However, I think that the one constant that won't go away is that people won't engage with things that they don't feel connected to and resonate with. Same word essentially, but that's the piece that we as creators, you included, and we are both agency owners as well, have to have to always take solace in is that we have taste and we've got, decision-making capabilities that can be nuanced, and we understand, our audience, and we understand, what works and doesn't work. And if you tweak things a tiniest little bit, that it's going to completely alter the way that people look and engage with things. Because at the end of the day, and then I'll also just add, just from a purely podcasting standpoint, sure, you can create an AI that can come on and pretend to be Roger Nairn and pretend to tell my story.
Right.
And the audience might not ever know the difference. Or I can come on and tell my story exactly as it is, warts and all, and, flub here and there, and just be more human. And that's the bit that I don't think AI can ever replace. So, we always kind of, my partner and I kind of make I guess it's sort of a joke, is like, do you want to listen to a story about, a woman that climbed to the top of Mount Everest with no legs? Or do you want to actually hear from the woman who climbed to the top of Mount Everest with no legs? Like, I want to hear from the woman directly versus a story that is created that is probably not true and could never be claiming to be true.
Right. Well, I mean, as you were talking, I'm like, my dyslexic brain is spinning off into creating this image of two AI avatars trying to have a conversation in a podcast. And it just feels so plastic, for lack of a better word, and fake. And I think, again, like, my son's 18 and his attitude around AI versus mine is fascinatingly different.
How so?
So for him, like, AI pisses him off, for lack of a better term. He's just like, now he likes using it because he got my dyslexia. So there's times where, he definitely uses it, just like you and I were talking about, as a tool to help edit his papers and make sure that, all the spelling errors that he and I are infamous for get addressed. And with me, it's my overuse of commas, kind of a thing. But beyond that, he's just like, the amount of AI slop, the new, a very prevalent term, he's just like, it's all fake. He's like, I don't want fake. He's just like, I get enough fake everywhere else.
Yeah. And actually, I read something the other day. It was a film director, and he made a great point. And I can't remember if there was a study attached to it or not, but essentially he said that we as humans evolutionarily are designed to notice when something's fake.
Yes.
And notice when something's real, and notice when something's human versus robot or versus AI.
Yeah.
We're kind of like walking BS detectors. I think that that's only going to be more and more honed. Now, obviously the AIs are getting more and more advanced, and it is becoming harder and harder to recognize what is and what isn't. But I think that sort of detector will always be on guard. And so there's going to be content that is AI, and walking into it that it's AI, and you're going to be okay with that. And then there's some that are going to do it thinking that they're enhancing the product or making it better. Like I could talk, as I could talk about this for hours, but there's a documentary that's just been released. It's being revealed, and it's not, this isn't a secret, but the entire they call it a docudrama. Which is interesting. I'll get back to that in a second, but it's 100% made by AI.
Wow.
It's based on what's going on in Iran right now. It's based on the sort of uprising in Tehran and the protests and all those sorts of things. And the whole thing was made for $2,000.
Oh my!
And
goodness.
if you watch it, you would not know that it's made by AI. But interestingly, he's calling it a docudrama, which is really interesting, because how is it a documentary if it's AI? You need to have real human. And so it's based
interviews,
on sort of, like based on true stories, but it's just not feeling like that's going to cut it.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
Huh. Well, to spin off on that into another rabbit trail question, because I'm fascinated by this. There's a lot more noise going on in that Hollywood, that the actors are worried that AI is going to replace them too, you know. And just back to your kind of natural human BS detectors, it's hard for me to picture, why would I want to watch an AI of Chris Hemsworth when I could watch the real Chris Hemsworth and appreciate his acting abilities? Not that every woman's just appreciating his acting abilities, but it's just like, why would I want to? Back to your point of, why would I want to watch a story about the lady who climbed Everest as opposed to talking to the real person? So, what's your thoughts on that? Do you see that as a real possibility, or do you think that's just a lot of the fear mongering around AI?
No, I definitely don't think it's fear mongering. You might be surprised by my answer, but I think when it comes to fictional stories, I think everybody in Hollywood has a real cause for concern. And as far as like whether people are going to watch it or not, I do think that people are, there is going to be people that opt out of not watching anything that is AI based. I mean, we have already been watching it this whole time. I just don't think it's been at the level that we are now at. But I do think that you're going to have some people that will always gravitate towards good stories being told. And I think as long as the stories are being told well, and as long as they look good, I actually don't think people are going to care when it comes to fiction.
Fiction specifically. Okay.
So, I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but Chris Hemsworth might be in trouble. I legitimately think that is a real concern. Now, on the nonfiction side of things, I think that's where it gets really interesting, because I don't think people are going to embrace, nonfiction stories being told that are actually fake. I think that's the bit that people are going to draw a line at. And so I think, I think people in animation, for example, are like insanely worried. And I think they have a right to be worried. I think people that are in the film industry are insanely worried, and they do have a right to be. But it's going to be a certain type of film. Like, I don't really think people have that much of a sort of, I don't think they're going to draw the line in the sand with Marvel 65. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
It feels like there's going to be some that people are okay with, but some that aren't. And I think there's going to be a certain, I hate to say it, like there's going to be a certain level of taste where people are going to not really care. And I think there are some actors that are in those sort of, if I was The Rock, I'd be worried. Seriously, like it just feels like
the type of movies that they typically act in.
Yeah, and that's not just me and my that's not just me and my crazy opinion. Like, I think you actually, if you look back in the history of other forms of technology, and when they've advanced, the production value, the production use of these things has actually significantly changed the game. And that has altered those industries. Like, I don't think the movie industry is the same way as it was, 20, 30 years ago. And a big piece of that is that it started to use a lot of the technology that we see today. Unfortunately, the movie makers don't really care about the craft anymore. They just want to make money. And so they're naturally gonna move towards, buying the rights to Chris Hemsworth and recreating him, 100 different ways,
right?
And making bank off it.
Mm-hmm.
I hate saying that, because that really, I think, like, I really think that, like, what is going on right now is fascinating and terrifying. And I don't want to say like we should all be running around with our hairs on fire, but like, you can start to smell the smoke. It is a really crazy time, and there's a potential for just a lot of upheaval in a number of different creative spaces.
Well, and you're right. I mean, the movie industry has gone through tremendous amounts of disruption. I forget what movie it was that my husband and I were showing, telling our 18-year-old, year or two ago, you gotta watch this. And he didn't watch it with me, but I was like, Escape from New York, way
Yeah.
back in the day. And we were laughing at all the technology in there. But I mean, think about it. They used to do claymation for everything, for special effects. And now you've got actors that do their entire movie in front of a green screen because half the characters they're interacting with don't exist outside of a computer program.
Well, yeah, and think about the economic impact of that. You are now no longer in the streets of New York or the streets of Vancouver or the streets of San Francisco filming. You're now in one space. You don't leave the studio. You only need a small crew. There's a huge knock-on effect to a ton of it. My son has all of a sudden discovered Michael Jackson music, which is adorable because, I grew up on and I'm talking like the old school, Billie Jean type stuff. And so he all of a sudden wanted to see music videos. And you talk about what it used to be like back then and production values and yet Michael Jackson was
Thriller
also at the
back
top
in
of
the
his
day
game.
Was cutting edge,
He was always cutting edge, but even the cutting edge back then seems so cheesy now. And it's just hilarious. So I know exactly how you feel about Lost in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my husband's always been a big horror movie fan. And for him, it's so much more about how they did the effects, and
there's a cult understanding of what really went into that. Yeah.
I still don't get it. He watches those when I travel for work. But I do appreciate the appreciation for the craft, but it is getting disrupted and changed dramatically. And, I would imagine the film industry is going to be following very closely on the heels of us in the digital, marketing space of we're getting disrupted at a much higher rate than a lot of the other industries. Anthropic put out a report, I don't know, earlier this year, a few months ago, I would say. And they were talking about, and I'm going to get the statistics wrong, but at least hopefully I'm hitting the right ballpark, concept idea. But, the theory is that AI could be adapted at could be doing 90% of tasks in certain industries. Mm-hmm. But even in those industries and most industries, it's getting implemented more in the 20s and 30s percentiles compared to, except digital marketing. And I think customer service was the other one they said. And in those industries, it's getting ours and customer service, it's getting adapted at a 65 plus percentile.
Yeah.
So what are, we talked earlier about, we use AI in everything that we do pretty much, but we use it in very specified ways as a tool, not something that replaces. But how are you navigating that in your organization?
It's a great question because on the one hand, we are always looking for tools to make our team, I've got a team of 25 and obviously as the CEO, I want everybody to be working efficiently. However, it's quite overwhelming, right? Because literally there's a tool every day that I stumble across. And so I actually find that the implementation is not so much the issue as it is the decision making and the kind of rubric of, because to me, and this, you mentioned your dyslexia, but mine's an ADD brain where I'm I want everything. I want to do it all. And actually my team has called me out on this. I'll tell you a quick story. Yesterday, I was having a back and forth with a researcher that we do some work with, and I've done a bunch of work with him. And anytime we go to book a meeting, he's always involved his executive assistant, and she's helped book the meeting. Same thing happened yesterday. Hey, so Nicole reached out and she's like, hey, it looks like Tom's available this date, and this date, Pacific time and Eastern time. What works for you? And I looked at my calendar and I responded. She said, great, I've just sent you an invite. Perfect. And just as I was about to move on to the next task, I happened to just notice, well, Nicole's got a different email address than Tom. That's kind of interesting. So the name of the company kind of jumped down. I was like, oh, interesting. So I looked up the company. Turns out Nicole has been AI this whole time.
No kidding.
I fell for it 100%. So Nicole
Wow.
is this amazing AI product that you connect it to your calendar. You tell it what time you want to work and what time you don't. How long do you like to have meetings for? You want to,
Yeah.
and then also like you want to prioritize your family over the business. And so you only will, anyways, all he needed to do was CC her on the response saying, Nicole will figure something out for us. And the AI just did it all. And I didn't, anyway, so I signed up for it. And all of a sudden my team is like, this is the scary, like, please don't do this. Like, it's just not cool and it's not fun. But I'm like, I'm just trying it out because my brain goes to, if I can save my team time coordinating meetings with our clients in a way that is going to make everyone's life easier, it's this is a long way of me saying I have to be careful because my team sees these things as like scary, dystopian. They're also younger. They're probably like your son. They're probably thinking this is all stupid. And I'm looking at it through the lens of, wow, this could really save you guys a ton of time.
Right.
So I have to be really careful. That being said, there are some things that we've implemented that are designed to save our creative team a ton of time in the weeds stuff, which allows them to be more focused on, writing scripts and preparing for their interviews and researching guests and things like that. So, but I have to be really careful because I want to do it all. I want to like literally pay for every subscription imaginable. And, it's not possible.
Right. No, I told my team, I'm like, my brain hurts all the time.
Yeah.
There is always something new, which a huge part of me loves. It is one of my favorite things about digital marketing is that it's always different. It always has been. It's always been new and exciting, which boring is like my kryptonite. I'm out of here. If it's any kind of repetition, I'm just like, please no.
Yeah.
I want something new. And, so I love that about AI, but it's amazing the speed at which it's advancing and growing. Cause we founded, my co-founder at the time and I, we merged companies in 2012. So we were the first digital marketing agency, full service agency in Alaska at kind of the very beginning of the digital marketing world. And I thought the disruption was crazy then. Looks like child's play compared to what we're experiencing now. And I definitely can relate to the fear component or the concern component with the employees and with your team.
And I think also given that we are a creative agency and we work remotely,
yes,
it's even easier to implement all these different tools to sort of make, because as a remote agency, our number one focus as far as the team and how we get the best work out of them has always been around creating the right operating system. And so one of the first hires that I made in the company, at the time we were just a whole bunch of like contractors, but then I hired somebody whose job it was to come in and, literally turn us into an operating system that just happens to output these amazing, unique podcasts. And so, but now that we're an operating system, it's easy to implement efficiencies into that operating system. Via some of these AI tools, but you have to be careful because there's still humans in that operating system.
Yes. Well,
and so it becomes this sort of like, battle of what makes sense and is going to be palatable for the team.
Right.
Because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
No, in fact, that's oftentimes the conversation that I have with my team is, it's not about just doing more in the same amount of time. AI could easily just make us busy bees. And this is what we're seeing in a lot of the big layoffs by Oracle and Amazon and these guys. I think Seattle's up to 142,000 people got laid off just in the first part of this year. I mean, that's an insane amount of layoffs for one city to manage, but it's like, hey, I'm going to cut this workforce and make the remaining people do twice as much work with AI. And it's like, that's not what we're trying to build here at Beacon. We're trying to build where the quality of the work that you do in the same period of time is exponentially better. It's not about volume, it's about quality. And if we lose our true north and think it's just about being busy, then we're giving back into that hustle culture that I've always, tried to fight against in my own life as well as my teams. But and that, I think, that's part of how we've combated that fear part is like, guys, we're not asking you to just be busier. We're
Right.
asking you which of these tools is going to actually transform your workflow to create better marketing products and bring more value to our clients, not just be able to produce more slop in the same amount of time, because that's what we'll get if the focus is do more, look busier.
Yeah.
But that is what I feel like is getting communicated, especially when these big companies do these layoffs. Regardless of what their motivations are, there's a lot of different noise around that. But the
Totally.
message that's still getting communicated is we want half the people to do twice as much work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's really the future, especially for creatives. Like, we're going to kill our creative soul if we ask them to do that.
Of course.
Yeah. So it's an interesting time to be a creative, company owner for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It is. Yeah. But I wouldn't have it any other way, to be honest.
Agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Roger, this has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah, super fun.
Absolutely fantastic. So for our listeners and viewers out there, if they want to keep this conversation going with you, if they've got more questions about how either to start a podcast or to really optimize their podcast, maybe they heard something today that they're like, oh, I was doing that. My podcast doesn't have a job. What's the best way to get a hold of you and keep that conversation going?
Yeah. So check us out at jarpodcast.com. So JAR podcast.com. Of course, reach out to me if you have any questions via the website. We also have a ton of resources through our blog. So just head on there and do a search and you'll find all sorts of great articles. And then also reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love to have conversations with folks there, and we post content there and share our shows with our clients, and a lot of our communications happens there. So hopefully you get a chance to meet people there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Roger.
And I promise I'll be real and I won't send Nicole my AI
to connect
executive
with them.
assistant. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you for that so much. And for all of those out there, we'll make sure that all those links are published with all of the content to make it as easy as possible for you to connect with Roger. And so thank you again for this amazing conversation. We definitely wish you the best of luck with everything with JAR and this whole crazy world we're living in. But thank you for your time today, Roger.
Thanks so much, Adrienne.
All right. Thank you so much, listeners. And we're excited to have you join us today and looking forward to connecting with you next time. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and a huge shout out and thank you to Roger for sharing his story and his expertise so openly with all of us today. These are the people who charted the course through the hard parts and are coming back to share their stories with us. If today's conversation resonated, please share it with a fellow founder or business owner who needs to hear it. And you know the drill. Subscribe, leave us a review, or come find us on beaconmm.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue the conversation there. So until next time, keep building, keep leading, and remember, there's always a way through. Beacon Way Podcast, inspiring leaders and elevating businesses.